Thanks. So I was kind of hyped for you today because I thought you'd get to meet KV. So Kurum is the head of education. He was going to try and get a lecture in today, but unfortunately he can't make it. So I'm here, and we're going to cover yet another awesome topic in JavaScript. So another one of those tools in your JavaScript tool belt which is going to prove particularly useful. If I'll say if objects were like your shield, callbacks here are going to be your sword. All right, we're going to be talking about swords, callbacks. And we're going to see that callbacks, I'll tell you way ahead of time, before we even know what callbacks are, I'll just say that callbacks are used in all sorts of places. So as we go through this lecture, I'm going to show you like a couple different ways that callbacks get used. But I do want you to keep in mind that, and this sentence will make sense in a sec, callbacks are not a thing. Callbacks aren't a thing. And we'll see what I mean by that in a minute or two. First of all, let's start with some notes. We're going to call this one notes.md. Choo. And we're going to go into a folder, lectures, callback notes, notes.md. All right. The reason I want to do this is, oh my gosh, it's like week 1, day, what day is it? It's 4. What? Week 1, day 4. We've made it to callbacks. This is amazing. Everybody give yourself a round of applause. Very good. Very good. I have to say, I'm very proud of you. Right? You've made it through some supremely difficult portions of the course. And you're going to find that the work that you've put into learning these like JavaScript fundamentals so far going to carry you through the program. If you find that like at the end of today or at the end of tomorrow, you still feel that your JavaScript skills, right, your JavaScript fundamentals need some work, that's totally fine, right? Just come reach out to me and reach out to Davey, right? And we can sit down and figure out, all right, which part of your fundamentals needs strengthening a little bit, right? It's not the end of the world if you don't understand callbacks by the end of the day, right? It really isn't. I'll tell you the truth. I went into my first dev job not knowing what a callback was. Right? I knew as much about callbacks as you do right now when I went into my first dev job. But, you end up getting it eventually. Now, with me as your teacher, let's see if we can understand callbacks in like an hour and a half. So, week 1, day 4, our goal today, let me bring up Compass callbacks. Our goal for the day is, just to give us something to get back to. Topics covered. First of all, functions are values. What? Functions are values. This is something that we touched on a bit yesterday, and we're going to continue exploring. Something called an anonymous function. Function declarations versus, we've never even used the phrase function expression before. And then function calling. It's like, all right, we've called a couple functions. Function passing. That's something that we're going to be exploring. And where'd you go? There you are. Here's our goals today. So functions are values. What the heck are anonymous functions? Function declarations versus function expressions. Function calling versus passing. And then we're going to get into actually using the words callback functions. Why do they exist? And as part of this, we'll be making our own versions of some functions that already exist. One of them is going to be for each. I think we're going to do our backwards function. That's going to loop backwards through an array or something like that. So what I want to start off with is motivating the idea behind functions again in the first place. We've worked with functions, right? You've dealt with making functions a little bit, right? We're going to really dive into the anatomy of what a function is. So can anybody give me a description or an explanation of what a function is and what it's for? And provides you with an output. Excellent. Actually, like a lot of the words that you've used here are super powerful, like takes, right? A parameter. So a function is something that receives some stuff. Now, it receives some stuff optionally. It might not take anything. It might take many things, right? So it receives, let's say it takes parameters, right? 0 or many, and provides you with an output. I like that. A function is basically a machine. It's a machine that you can put stuff into and something will come out, right? And it's this isolated machine. It's not necessarily connected to other stuff. It's this machine that I can use anywhere. For example, I might have a function, right? Imagine I have a function that takes two numbers and adds them, right? Or I might even say, and gives back the sum. Because a function is going to optionally take stuff, and then it'll also optionally return stuff back. Right? A function will often take things, do some work, and then give you something. It's like when you make a transaction at the store, you'll give somebody money, and then they give you things back. And that action of receiving something in exchange for the parameters that you gave is called returning. Right? So inside of a function, you can write all the code that would run on those parameters that it gets. And then inside of the function, you can also say, what should the function give back to the person who called it? So functions are going to be useful for us when we want to wrap up actions. When we want to wrap up certain sections of code that we want to give a name. For example, I might have a function, and this isn't going to be real code. I might have a function called get all the players. So this function, just by its name, intuitively, I can begin to assume that maybe this function, when I call it, it goes and gets all of the players, whatever that means. Maybe it'll go get them from a database, or maybe they're written on a wall or somewhere, and it goes and looks at it. And I can even start assuming that I can figure out what the output of this function is. What might the output of this function be? So the output might be, it might be a list of the players, the player names, because we are getting all the players, right? So the output of the function is probably like a list of the players, right? Or in some format, I'm going to get the players back. Right? I might have another function called, right, add two numbers A and B maybe. And the output of the function might be the sum of A and B, right? So the sum of A and B. And the reason we're going through this right now is because I want you to see that calling the function ends up giving me the output, right? If I call the function, I get the output. But a function is just a thing that I can talk about as well, right? I can say, oh, did you know that you can add two numbers? I didn't actually add two numbers right now. I've just said that that's a thing that can happen. I might also say, hey, did you know that you can get all the players? Again, I didn't actually get all the players yet. I'm just talking about that thing. I might even say something like, hey, later, would you be able to get all the players? And see, that's again a thing that I've said, right? Would you be able to get all the players? But I'm not saying do it right now. I'm saying maybe later do this action, right? And see how like that kind of language can be really useful in real life. If I'm saying something like, hey, when you are at the store, can you also pick up milk, right? Or after you go to the store, could you go to the bank? I'm not saying go to the bank right now, but I'm giving you an action that you can hold and you can think about and you can do something with later. And what we're getting into there is that there's a difference. There's a difference between actually running a function or actually doing an action and knowing about that action. Being able to move that action around. Because I might tell you, hey, would you mind answering the phone? Right, that's an action. To answer the phone is an action. But I'm telling you, hey, would you mind answering the phone? And you might turn to somebody and you might say, hey, could you answer the phone? And that person might turn around and say, hey, could you answer the phone to the person next to them? Right? And that action is being passed between people. So if we want to be able to express ourselves in that rich way, in a language like JavaScript, what JavaScript gives us is access to dealing with functions as values. Right? The problem that the JavaScript designers identified was that people want to be able to pass around actions to other places. They don't want to run the code right now. They just want to take it and move it somewhere else. So the JavaScript designers said, hey, you know what? You know how like strings are values that I can pass around and put in variables and give to people? And you know how Booleans are values? Well, surprise, surprise, functions are values as well. This is going to look weird at first because the syntax is just a little surprising. But I want you to think of functions as just special kinds of values. So we're going to work through a little exercise here. I'm going to pop open, call this one script.js. So the main kind of overarching problem is that I want to be able to give to somebody else an action to do, right? So if I wanted you to answer the phone, for example, right, and you're distinct from me, I want to tell you, hey, can you answer the phone? Maybe now or when the phone rings, can you answer the phone? I want to give that to you. But in JavaScript, if I was to say something like, answer the phone, then this immediately answers the phone. So it's like, as I'm trying to tell you to answer the phone, I'm answering it by accident. Right? That's just a side effect of the way that this part of like a function is just defined. Right? So if I try to say, can you answer the phone, this syntax here is going to get me to immediately answer it. So I would like to say something like, hey, Steven, can Steven answer the phone when it rings? Like, that's what I'm trying to get to, right? And as part of that, I need to be able to take this answer the phone action and give it to somebody without actually running it, right? So we're going to do a little exercise here where let's start off by saying, if I have if I have like, let's say var animal equals dog, and I go console.log, animal, what do I get? I get dog, cool. And then if I get var animal equals cat, but I don't need var anymore, animal equals cat, and then I go console.log animal, what do I get? But in total, what do I get? I get dog and then cat, right? So at this point here, we've become fairly comfortable with variables, and we're comfortable with the fact that a variable is just a bucket. It's just a bucket that you can put values into, right? And I can change the value that's in that bucket, right? So at this point here, I put dog into it, and then when I console log animal, I look in the bucket and it's, oh, it's dog. And then I take dog out and I put cat in inside instead. So I say, hey, console log animal, you look in and you see cat. These are the things that we can do with values and variables, is we can move them around. Now, I'm going to hop into this JavaScript console so I can play around with a couple things. Let me make a function called hello. I'm going to go console.log hello. Now, when I do hello with parentheses, what happens? It says hello. Now, as part of the function invocation syntax, when I invoke a function, I need to put parentheses on it. As soon as I get told that I have to do something, I go, well, like, what if I don't, though? What if I do this? What happens when I run this? Right. So it might tell me that it's a function. Hello, if I run it without parentheses, hello is just the function hello. It hasn't been run. Right? So I can refer to a function and invoke it. Whoops. I can refer to a function and invoke it. Or I can refer to a function and not invoke it at all. Right? Notice that this didn't give me an error. Right? Just the fact that this doesn't give me an error is going to be interesting for me in a second. So I showed you that I could take var animal and go dog, because this dog string is a value. And if I'm telling you that a function is a value, it might be interesting to go, hey, var some thing, we'll call it some function, equals hello. And notice again that I'm writing hello without the parentheses. And that's legal. It's just a thing that JavaScript lets me do. It lets me take a function or an action and save it in a variable. And now that I've done this, I just want you to think for a sec, what do you think happens when I go some function with parentheses? It's going to run the hello function. Right? Wow, right? This idea here, the fact that functions are just values, is going to allow us to do a lot of things. Then among that is going to allow us to do stuff with callbacks. We're going to see what callbacks are in, again, a little while. So what you said over there is, if I was to go some function equals hello with the parentheses instead, remember that activity that we did at the beginning of the lecture where I told you that when you call a function, what you get is the output, right? If I was to do this, then some function would end up being the return value of hello, right? If I look at my hello, there isn't a return value, so it would end up being undefined, right? So if I did this right now, some function would end up being undefined, right? Again, what I want you to see is that there's a big difference between me going like this or like this. This is referring to the function itself as an action, and this is referring to run the function and get me the output. So just to write that in the notes real quick, I can do function hello, right? That console.logs hello. And in here I might go var some function equals hello without the parent. Now, I showed you this earlier. And we're going to play with that in a second in the context of functions. I forgot to write in here, the thing that we could do now is go some function hello. So I can refer to the hello function, some function parentheses. I can refer to the hello function through some function. Right, so I can now use some function to run hello. Because the thing is a function is just a special kind of object, right? You're going to explore that deeper and deeper. But right now, I just want to say a function is just a special kind of value. It's a special kind of thing that we can also invoke. So I can move it around, or I can tell it to do your special action. It's just always waiting latent until you run it. The reason I showed you this beforehand is because I might have a second function. Because console.log goodbye. And the thing that I want to do right now is I want to take var some function. Whoops, not var again. I always forget. Some function, since I've declared it up here. And now I want to point it to goodbye. And when I run some function, what happens? It's going to show me goodbye. So I can change around the value that's stored in this variable. I could point it to an entirely different function. And now when I run it, it's going to be pointing now some function runs goodbye. Okay. And if I play around with this in my console, let's close this. If I play around with this in my console, I have my function hello. I have this function. I have my function goodbye. Goodbye. And where my some function used to point to hello, so I used to be able to go some function hello. Now if I have some function point to goodbye, when I run some function, I get goodbye. Right? This is going to be useful for me because I'll be able to say things like, you know, maybe when you're, like after you go to the store, here's a thing to do, right? Var thing to do might be go to the bank. Right? And maybe that's good for today, because I have a function called go to the bank, but then tomorrow, after thing to do, I might say go to the cobbler. I don't like things that people do. Like go to the cobbler and have my shoes cobbled. Does that make sense? So I'd like to be able to move these functions around, and that's going to be useful for me. Are there any questions about this so far? Right. The thing that confuses me when I first see this stuff is that I've gotten so used to, like when I say a function is a value, I've gotten so used to seeing like var num equals 3, for example, and I've gotten used to the fact that when I declare a variable, it always points to something that I immediately recognize as a value. Because I typically usually see 3 or numbers written after var num equals something. Like, you hardly ever see just the number 3 like this, right? So it feels a little weird for me to go function thing is, whatever, console.log zoop, and then it feels really weird to go var like func or whatever equals thing, because it just seems so much different than the var num equals 3. What we're seeing here is that this is a function declaration, and it's been split on a different line than where we're assigning it to a variable. Something that's become really popular now, and we're going to see why, is to take the function declaration and actually just end up doing it on the same line as the variable assignment. Right? I can go var func equals, and then this here says make a new function called thing that console logs zoop. And this is a thing that we can do. So one of the reasons that it becomes popular is because like I can straight up remove the name thing now. I can remove thing. And now I'm saying, hey, var func is just this function. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a name. There it is. And what this has afforded us is the fact that like I don't need to spend time trying to figure out what to call this function. Right? That's one of the things that this solves for me. Right? I'll tell you that like the bigger thing that gets solved, you're actually going to learn next Tuesday. Right? We're gonna learn about that next Tuesday. But there's also just the fact that now if I wanted to store functions and variables, right, I can do it on one line instead of having to do it on multiple lines. Right? Yes? For the one for var func function thing, have you defined thing here? Like if you pointed to thing, let's see. Let me just refresh the page. So if I did this, you're saying, can I go thing? No, it's not defined. So we gave it a name, but then it's not even being saved anywhere. Right? No, no. In JavaScript, with every like single expression here, I'm declaring one variable in the outside scope. Right. So the thing is, we get to this point now where we're like, we don't even really need the name on the function like that. We're just going to name the variable. Right? We're just going to name the variable. Now I have a variable called func that I can run and go zoop. And now in the same way that I'm used to like reassigning variables for numbers or for strings or for booleans, I can go func equals this totally new function. Right? It's this totally new function at console.logs brah. And now when I go func, it does something different. Right? I want you to get really comfortable with the idea that this thing here is just like saying the number 3. Right? It's just like writing a string or saying false. It just looks a little bit funkier. Right? But at the end of the day, this thing that I've highlighted is a single value. It's a function. Right? I could make my function now like even more complicated if I wanted to. Func could be return 4. So right now, if I look at func, it's a function. And what happens when I go func, and in parentheses, I get the number 4. Right? I get the number 4 because that's the return value. Can I give these functions parameters? Absolutely. Right? Maybe my func is something that takes in like a name, and it returns, I'll have it return hello plus name, maybe. And now my func, when I run it on Clarice, I get hello Clarice. Yes? Yeah, func is a function. Right? Great question. You mean like the fact that I went like this? Yeah, this just does this because the console prints out whatever value it gets. But say I did, like, if I did this in a script, I wouldn't see hello Clarice. I would have to go console.log func Clarice. Yeah, it's not stored anywhere. If I wanted to store that value, I might do var greeting equals func of Clarice. And see, now it didn't print it to the screen, it just saved it in the variable. And now I can go console.log greeting and see that that's hello Clarice. Right? Because again, my function here, it doesn't console log anything. It just returns a string. Right? So I'm going to put that in to the, whoops. No, I don't want to pay for Sublime. Stop. Okay, I'm going to put that into the notes and I'll format it nicely for you. So it was Clarice var greeting, and then I can go console.log greeting. Cool. So again, the thing that we're doing here is we're treating functions, like the action itself, as a value. Right? I'm treating the action itself as a value. Now you're going to do something bananas here. I said that there might be things like var. What I'm going to start doing now, from now on, is I'm going to write my functions as go to the cobbler equals function. So from now on, I'm going to shift, or I'm like most of the time. The only times I don't do this is because I've just forgotten. But what I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to try to write my functions always like this. So that it's evident that the function is a value that's being stored in a variable. Exactly. Yeah, so this function here that doesn't have a name, that's called an anonymous function. Right? The function itself doesn't have a name, but the variable has a name. Right? So the function itself is anonymous, and I can put any anonymous function into this variable now. The true power of anonymous functions is going to become clear in the second half of the lecture. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make a couple functions, like go to the cobbler, console.log, I'm at the cobbler. Oops. I'm at the cobbler, and then cobblers do with stuff with shoes. Whoop. All right, so I'm at the cobbler and there's a shoe. Are these Tims? Nice. And then I might have something like var go to the store. Console.log. I'm at the store. Now, presumably I could run go to the store and go to the store. And I could also go to the cobbler, and I'm at the cobbler. I might want to go to the store and then go to the cobbler. And I'm able to declare these functions and then have them run in order. Things get interesting though when maybe Steven, can I just like insert you into the thing just because? So this is things Steven does. Steven might go to the store. I'm at the store, and then I'm at, I don't know, what do you do on a Sunday? Like I'm studying code, and we'll put like a little laptop. Boop. And then console.log, maybe I'm having a nice dinner. And here's just a bunch of stuff. I'm at the store, then I'm studying code, and then I'm having a nice dinner. So I might have, we'll do things Steven does and go to the cobbler. I'll take both of these things and I'll put them into my thing here. So I've got go to the cobbler, things Steven does. Maybe Steven does a bunch of stuff, right? And then go to the cobbler. And there's that. But in my story here, I'm going to say that Steven is at the store, and maybe the cobbler is like really close to the store. And then I'm studying code, I'm having a nice dinner, but then I'm asking Steven, after he's had his nice dinner, to go to the cobbler. Steven's like, couldn't you have asked me before? I was at the store. The store is near the cobbler. So I need some way of interrupting Steven. I need some way of asking Steven, hey, in between these things that you're doing, can you run this particular action? Now, one might say that I could just take I'm at the cobbler and put it right in the middle of things Steven does. But this is like the things Steven does every day, and I don't need Steven to go to the cobbler every day. I need Steven to go to like the cobbler one of the days. And then another one of the days, I might need Steven to go to the library. Function. Might need Steven to go to the library. I'm at the library. Then we'll get some books. All right. So on different days that Steven does things, I might want to ask him to do different things. So I need some way inside of things Steven does to say, hey, do that day's special activity. Right? Do that day's special activity and then continue with, I'm studying code and I'm having a nice dinner. Right? Now, we've been talking about how functions are values. Right? We've been talking about how functions are just these things that I can give to someone. What would you like to be able to do in order to go to the library or go to the cobbler into things Steven does? What would you like to be able to do? I'd like to call them, but how is things Steven does going to access those functions from in here? So I might go to the library. Sure, I might do that. But then now this means every time I call things Steven does, Steven's going to the library. But I might want one day to tell Steven go to the library, and another day I want to tell Steven to go to the cobbler. And yes. I might make a variable, today's activity. So of our today's, actually, do you want to say it inside of things Steven does or outside? Pardon? The variable would be outside. So I might do, like, we'll say, I'll just zoom out a little bit. Var today's activity equals, and then I'll set this to today's activity, right? I might go, today's activity is go to the library. Go to the library. And then for things Steven does, and here, instead of running go to the library directly, Steven might go today's activity. What if you didn't have an activity on that day? Then I may make today's activity something blank. For right now, we're just going to assume that there's an activity every day. It might, yeah, it would throw an error, but for the purposes of this right now, let's just assume that there's always an activity, right? So I'm going to take these functions, go to the cobbler, and things Steven does. Let me just move today's activity down. Go to the cobbler, go to the library. This thing I'm going to do in here. Right, go to the cobbler, go to the library, those are things. And then I might make this variable that says today's activity is go to the library. So if somebody was to run today's activity, then they get I'm at the library. Right? And by extension, if I change today's activity to go to the cobbler, then if somebody runs that identical code, so today's activity, they run that identical code again, what they get is I'm at the cobbler instead of I'm at the library. So I'm able to switch out what today's activity is. Right? Again, I don't want you to stress too much about the syntax. I just want you to know the concept that I can switch out what today's activity is. So if I have things Steven does, if I have this thing be console log I'm at the store, and then do whatever today's activity is. Do you remember our conversation about scope that we had on day 2, where I was saying when you write something in a function, JavaScript's going to look for that thing inside of the function first. And if it can't find it there, it's going to go outside. So in this case here, if I was to run things Steven does, JavaScript's going to look for today's activity inside of this function, right? And it can't find it. So it's going to hop out, and it's going to see, hey, today's activity is go to the cobbler. So when I run things Steven does right now, I'm at the store, I'm at the cobbler, I'm studying code, and I'm having a nice dinner. And this is awesome because it doesn't say go to the cobbler here. It just says do today's activity. If I was to change today's activity to go to the store, go to the library, right? My bad. If I was to change it to go to the library, when I ask Steven to do things, what do I get? I get I'm at the library. Right? I'm at the store, then I'm at the library, then I'm studying code, and I'm having a nice dinner. And see, this is a problem that we've solved by using functions as values. right? The fact that I'm able to change around what action I'm going to be asking Steven to do, right? That's only possible because I can treat a function as a value. And now I can make these complicated, sophisticated functions that do all sorts of different actions. They're not just changing the thing that gets printed, they're straight up calling different functions. So my go to the library function, like that could be its own very complicated thing if I wanted it to be, right? But at the basic level, this is the implication of having functions as values. Right? Again, this is a thing that the JavaScript designers put in. Some languages don't have this, right? Some languages don't work like this. But you're going to see over the course of the next couple weeks that there's a lot of web development problems that are very similar to what we just did right now. And since JavaScript is a language for web development, the JavaScript people said, hey, you know what? Let's make this happen, right? Because it solves our problems in web development. Right? Again, it's a little early for us to talk about exactly what those web development problems are. Right? That conversation starts on Monday. Actually, it starts on the weekend when you're doing your readings. But this construct here, the fact that our function are values, lets us do this. Now, I want you to note that this thing here, your suggestion, which is actually really good, to make the variable outside and call it inside. This requires me to do a little bit of extra work to say, switch around what today's activity is, right? It requires that every time I want to say things Steven does, beforehand I would have said what today's activity is. So splitting this on two lines can get kind of confusing, especially because if I look at this line here, things Steven does, and I look at this line up here, things Steven does, they look the same, but they end up doing different things. And that's just confusing. Right? It's confusing for you as a developer. Right? If I told you that two lines of code that looked identical print out different things. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to say things Steven does, and then we're going to give it go to the library. I want to be able to write code that looks like this. I want to be able to write code that looks like this, or looks like go to the cobbler. Because look at how much clearer this is than things Steven does just on its own. Right? Especially when we were doing, what was it? It was var today's activity is go to the library, and then today's activity is go to the cobbler. Can we agree? I mean, if you don't agree, like, just tell me. Can we agree that this looks better than this? Right? So we want to get to this point. What does it mean when I write something inside of the parentheses? It's a parameter, right? You've gotten used to seeing functions that have like just strings being passed in or numbers or all kinds of stuff. I want to be able to pass go to the library as a parameter. And the way that we're going to do that here is when we get things Steven does, imagine that this was like in a different, like I've cleared what there was before. To get today's activity, I can take today's activity and put it up here. And say, hey, thing Steven does, talking to the function, saying, hey, you know what? To get today's activity, look at your parameters. Right? You will have received today's activity. And the way we read parameters is, when you give me today's activity, this is what I do with it. So here, when you give me today's activity, eventually I will do it. And what this lets me do now is I can declare, I can declare the go to the cobbler and go to the library functions. And I can also declare things Steven does with today's activity. And now I can say things Steven does, and here is the activity. It's go to the cobbler. I'm at the store, I'm at the cobbler, I'm studying code, and I'm having a nice dinner. And I can also say things Steven does, go to the library. I'm at the store, I'm at the library, I'm studying code, I'm having a nice dinner. I'm just scrolling up here again to show you the syntax that we're doing for that. Is that I'm able to declare this function, say that, hey, you're going to receive an action. You will. And when you get that action, just run it. Notice, at the time of making things Steven does, Steven has no idea what today's activity is. Steven's so excited, like, oh, I'm going to do today's activity. Yes. I have no idea what it is. It's like when I never save numbers in my phone, and I get texts from people being like, hey, you want to hang out? I'm like, of course I do. I have no idea who you are. Absolutely. Let's do it. That's what's going on here. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing, but you know I'm going to do it. So then anytime I give Steven something new to do, Steven goes, yeah, absolutely. Let's run it. And what's hilarious is that I don't even need to declare these functions ahead of time. I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. It's going to be really weird. And then we're going to take a break. Okay. Actually, before I do it, are there any questions? Yes. Sure. I mean, we could do, you would have to write a function like var pick random activity. That's a great question. Yeah, pick random activity. And in this function here, it would have to somehow do like, you'd have to go math random or something. You'd have to give it a list of activities to pick from, and eventually it would have to return something like go to the cobbler. And then I'd be able to say, hey, thing Steven does is like pick random activity. Where I don't know what the activity is going to be. I mean, I know because I've written go to the cobbler. And Steven's going to end up doing, whoops. No, I forgot this. So pick random activity. I don't know what this is going to be, but whatever activity it is, it gets passed over to Steven. So, there you go. So I end up getting something like this. That's a great question, actually. I recommend playing around with doing something like that because it'd be a lot of fun. I'm going to put this as like a starting point for you, though. And then that was things Steven does, pick random activity. So as an exercise, hint, you'll have to have an array of functions to pick from. You know how you can have arrays of strings, arrays of numbers? Why not make an array of functions, right? They're just values. Yep.
Before we were passing a variable as the argument for things Steven does, right? But for the random one, you passed in an action.
Mm-hmm.
Because we need to run that before we get.
Yeah, if we break this apart, like this pick random activity, you mean? Yeah. If we break this thing apart, notice how this thing Steven does is given a function, right? Pick random activity, what is this thing? This returns a function. So I could split this into 2 lines if that's more legible. The random activity is pick random activity. It's that. What I had done was instead of writing it in 2 lines, I'd written in 1 line. Right? But either one of these is going to work. So are there other questions about what we've done so far? Cool. Making sense? Good stuff. Again, I know that like there's only so much you can learn from like watching somebody play with it, right? I want you to take time to just kind of mash it and mess around with it a little bit. Here's the like bizarre thing that I'm going to do. So far, I've had to do things like give Steven go to the library, or in this case here, I had to like pick a random activity first and run it. Just going to refresh so that this is clean. And here's what I'm going to do. Go to the cobbler, go to the library are functions. Thing Steven does is a function that takes today's activity. Now, I'm going to do this. Thing Steven does, and then thing Steven does takes a function, right? No, not go to the gym. Whoops. Console.log. I'm at the gym. Maybe. All right, that's a broken emoji. I want weights. No. Dumbbell. Okay, arm, whatever. We'll do arm. I'm at the gym. So I can just, on the fly, just make a new function. It's like single use. Right, here's a function, use it. Did I have to give it a name? No. What do we call this kind of function? An anonymous function. Right, this is a function that doesn't have a name. And we're going to continue playing around with this once we take a break. But what I wanted to say is that what we've done this whole time, right, this is like the end of, oh man, I don't want to spoil. Is everybody here caught up with M. Night Shyamalan's films? Today's activity was a callback this whole time. It was a callback this whole time. You've been dealing with callbacks. A callback is an action that I give to another function to call later. That's all it is. It's an action that I pass in as a parameter, a function that gets passed in as a parameter. Cool? We're going to continue playing with that after the break, but let's take 10 minutes. So at 10:17, we'll pick up again and continue. Good stuff? get back in this. So what we've done so far is we've played with functions as values, we've passed them into places, and then I ended off here by writing something that looked something like whoop-pow. Things Steven does, I'm at the gym. And this was useful for me because I didn't even have to declare some go to the gym function ahead of time. Right? This is the same as when you have a var num equals 3 and you go maybe a function say num like this versus when you go say num 3. Right? So in this case here, I've actually written the function inside of the parameters. It's as if I'd done this. Cool? This is just something you're going to have to play with. Just going to have to play with it for a while until it feels natural. But this is the power of an anonymous function. Because I don't need to go ahead and create more functions with names and pass them in. I can make Steven go to the gym, or I can make Steven go hiking. All right, mountain. All right, Steven's going to Mount Doom today. So I'm at the gym, I'm at the store, then go hiking. I'm studying code, and I'm having a nice dinner. Right, so I don't even need to do that extra work of going ahead and figuring out what am I going to name this function. Let me save it in a variable somewhere. I can just use it in line. The phrasing I usually use for this is I say this is an inline function being passed as a callback. Right? Now, in the first half of the lecture, I actually didn't use the word callback very often. But we were dealing with callbacks this entire way through. When I have something like this function, today's activity, the convention is that if you can't figure out a better name for it, you call it callback. That's the convention. Is if I have some extra action that gets passed in, if I don't have a better name for it, I'm going to call it callback. Sometimes you'll see it shortened to CB. Right? So if I was to write what a callback is in a nutshell, like callback in a nutshell, it's an action that's passed through, or a function that's passed through in a parameter. Okay? A function that's passed to another function in a parameter. That's what a callback is. Right? That receiving function can call the other function. This dude on silent. Right? The receiving function can call the passed function as a callback. That's the language that we're going to use. So anytime you see the word callback, think that. There's going to be one function given to another one in the parameters, and that's all it is. Now, I can make my functions get funky. I can make my functions get funky, and that's what we're going to do with the following examples. Let me just go back to the goals up here real quick. Functions are values. Do we feel good about that? Right? Functions are values. What are anonymous functions? Quick. They have no names. They're functions with no names. A function declaration versus a function expression. Now, I didn't use the word function expression, but a function declaration is going to be this versus a function expression being this. Right? That's it. Declaration is when you don't have the function being saved into a variable. Expression instead is when you take an anonymous function and you save it in a variable. Right? That's what function declaration versus expression means. Do we feel good about that? Right? Again, it's going to take a little bit of time, but as long as we get the gears kind of rolling there. Function calling versus function passing. Is that starting to make sense? Right? I can call a function with parentheses, but I can pass a function without parentheses. And now what we did is we made callback functions. The callback function was my go to the cobbler. I didn't use the word higher order function. I didn't use the word higher order function, but what my higher order function is that down at the bottom here, my things Steven does. Things Steven does is a function that's incomplete. It's a function that's got some code in it, and then it's incomplete. It's got, like, today's activity is missing. Things Steven does depends on being given more code to run. So things Steven does is what we call a higher order function, meaning it's not complete. It needs a callback to be finished. Does that make sense? Right? Again, that's just special language. Higher order function just means a function that requires a callback. And now we've made it here to the end, which is where we're going to implement our own versions of some functions, such as, for example, a for each. Now, I don't think you've used for each just yet. Have you? No. Cool. That's good. No, it's been like a little while since I've gone through the day 3 material. Some of you might have done some reading into it, but let's say that I had, for example, an array. I'm going to go var characters. And my characters here are going to be John, Danny, Ghost, we're going to say Edward Stark, or Ned. And what I want to do is, oh man, no, I'm going to get into spoiler territory. Damn. Oh, I can't. Okay, well, we'll just do people. And we'll do, like, Bradlina, Janistifer, Danielone. These are just a bunch of people in my life. And I want to go through each person and say hello to them. And then I might also have another list of people. This is like people I like and people I hate. Oh, people I hate. Jack Arena. You'd be such a good dad. You come up with all the best names. Philo Branchetta and Jim Othino. I just don't like these people, and I want to go through them, go through each person I hate, and say, oh, hi there, to them. Just a little passive aggressiveness. I still want to do somewhat of the same action, which is to go through each person, but I want to do something slightly different with this group of people versus this group of people. So it would be nice for me to have go through each function where maybe to one group of people, like the people I like, I want to say hello. Right? Again, this isn't code that exists yet, but I would like to be able to run this. Say go through each person I like and say hello. And then I would also like to be able to say, hey, go through each people I hate and say, oh, hi there. Just, oh, hi, didn't notice you there. So this is my dream code. If I run this right now, I'm going to run into a couple issues. So I actually want to take this. I'm going to put it into go through each.js. Go through each.js. And in my terminal, I'm actually going to try to run this code. Just gonna make the font bigger. Cool. Is the font pretty big? Cool. Would you like it better if it was like a light screen? No? Okay, cool. Do let me know if you ever want colors changed. So what I'd like to be able to do is go in Node and say, hey, run the go through each file. And I'm running into an error right now. It says go through each is not defined at line 11. And I go look at line 11 and I'm like, yeah, fair enough. This go through each function that I'm pretending I have, I don't actually have it. So I can go ahead and I can say, okay, var go through each equals, well, it's a function. It's a function, and then I run this, and I ran into some other error right now. What's my new error? Say hello is not defined. Say fair enough. Say hello is not defined, and I'll go and I'll say var say hello equals function, and then go through each people I hate. Say oh hi there. Whoop. Oh wow, you right there? Say oh hi there. That's also not defined, so I would run into the same error. So let me just make that function. And look, like I just like making empty functions. Just empty little stubs. They're not going to do anything, but I've made it to a place where when I run this code now, I don't actually get an error. Right? It's a good place to start. I know that maybe the way I've connected some of the things is good, maybe the rest of it isn't, but I don't actually have an error. So the first thing that I like doing is writing my dream code. Right? As you saw, I wrote go through each people I like and say hello. That was my dream, and then I've worked to make that sort of happen. Now, what would going through each do? Well, I need to, first of all, in my dream function use, I've said that go through each takes two things. What are they? An array and a function. Okay, they're going to take an array of people and a callback or a thing to do, a function. And so I need to make sure that my go through each function expression here says that the function takes an array of people, right? I can name this whatever I want. I'll take an array of people and it'll also take a thing to do. Again, I can name this anything I want. I could call it CB. I'm going to call it thing to do. And what do I want to do with that array of people? What have I said I want to do? I want to go through each. So what kind of construct, what kind of JavaScript construct am I going to need? A for loop, right? I can make this function now, a little meatier. I might want to go for And I'll say var. And if I wanted to go through all of the people, how am I going to structure this for loop? I equals 0 to start at the beginning. And then exactly, array of people dot length. Because I want to go through the array of people. And then I want to go through one by one, so I'll say I++. And now I can, if I wanted to in here, go console.log I. Right? I'll just go console.log I and I'll say, well, the index right now is I. And when I run this code, what I end up getting is index 0, index 1, index 2. Index 0, index 1, index 2. I got 6 things get console logged. 3 things. Twice. And if I look at my arrays of people, I have 2 arrays of 3 people, so that actually ends up making sense. What if I wanted to get a particular person at a time inside of this for loop? What would I do? Right. So the current person is array of people, square bracket I here. And now I got person Bradlina, Janistifer, Danielone, Jackarina, Philobranchetta, and Jimothino. So I am actually going through each of the people with my calls here. And what I like to do is comment out one and see what it does. Okay, well I got Bradlina, Janistifer, and Danielone. And then I go and I comment out the other one instead. And I got the other 3 here. Right? So I'm getting comfortable with understanding what my functions are doing. Right? The tinkering is important. Just see what happens when you remove code. Even when your code is working, see what happens when you remove a line of 2 or code. A line or 2 of code. Now, what do I want to do with each person? I want to say something to them. I want to run the thing to do. And I have access to thing to do in here. I know that thing to do at the moment of making this function, I have no idea what it is. I have no idea. It's like how Steven had no idea what today's activity was going to be, but he was excited. He's like, I'm going to do it. Right? Here, I have no idea what the thing to do with the people is. Now, what I might do is go ahead and write some code in here, like console.log hello, and console.log oh, hi there. And then one of those, I'm trying to pick this emoji here. Ah, hi there. All right. And since hello or oh hi there are the things being passed in, those are going to be the particular thing to do. And I run this right now. I get person Bradlina, hello. Person Janistifer, hello. Danielone, hello. And then, Jackarina, oh, hi there. Right? Philobranchetta, oh, hi there. Now, it might be even better for me as part of my functionality to not just say, oh, hi there, but also put their name in there. Like, oh, hi there, Jackarina. Hi. Just for some extra sass. So it would be nice for me to have the actual name in here. My dream is to be able to do something to the tune of this. Oh, hi there, name. whatever the name is. In order for me to have access to the name in here, where do I need to make a change? What's that? The list of parameters for say, oh, hi there. This one now requires a name. Yes? If I had the name in the previous function here, I want you to play around with that. Yeah, that's a good question. For right now, play with it. Right now, we're going to make sure that everything's plugged properly together. So if I need a particular variable here, name, it needs to be passed in through the parameters. And what this means now is that when you use say, oh, hi there, you have to say, oh, hi there with a name. So my thing to do here, I need to give it that name. I need to go array of people, square bracket I, to give it that name. Now, do you notice something strange? Is there some inconsistency here? I don't have the same parameters on the say hello function, even though the say hello function is also going to be the thing to do. I haven't given it a name parameter. So in JavaScript is a pretty forgiving language. If you give it, if you give a function extra parameters, as in if I call say hello here, if I went say hello, and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I gave it stuff it doesn't need. What JavaScript's going to do, what the function's going to do, is it's going to say, I'm just going to ignore that stuff. It doesn't actually care. It doesn't cause an error. That's a JavaScript thing. At the same time, what JavaScript does is, if you give it too few things, so say I had my say oh hi there function, which says that it requires a name. If I called it without giving it a name, name is going to be undefined. Right? That's something that I want you to play with, and it's not the point of today's lecture. But I want you to know that me not having the thing written in here is okay. If I was to just run this, what JavaScript's going to do is when I give it a name for the say hello function, it'll just ignore it. What I get now is when I run go through each, I get hello, hello, hello for when I said to say hello. And when I wanted to say oh hi there, I get oh hi there Jack Arena. Oh hi there Jim Othino. Now ideally, I want to make all of my functions that are going to be used in the same place have the same kind of structure. Just because JavaScript lets me do this doesn't mean it's a good thing. Right? So often, what I'll suggest to you, right, especially when you're starting off, is to just ensure that your callback functions here, say oh hi there and say hello, are structured sort of the same. Right? Over time, these things are going to get a bit more nuanced, but right now, I'm going to go hello, name, over there. So, to conclude this here, I have these people I like, and I will zoom in a second because I know that's teeny. I have these people that I like, and I have these people that I hate. And when I go through each of them, I want to do a particular thing. When I go through the people I like, I want to say hello. When I go through the people I hate, I want to say oh hi. Now when I run this, let me just get rid of this console log person up here. When I run this, I end up with Hello, Bradlina. Hello, Janistifer. Oh, hi there, Jackarina. Oh, hi there, Philobranchetta. Where again, there's this shared functionality, which is going through everything. But there's a piece of customization. Again, this arises out of the fact that I can move them around, I can give them to people, I can put them in parameters. Functions in JavaScript are just values. Does this idea at a high level make sense? Right? Again, I want to stress that the syntax for this is new to you. Right? The syntax for this is completely new to you. So don't expect yourself to fully understand this right now. It's going to take a little bit of time. Right? I want you to mess around with it. I want you to play with it and kind of break it. Right? And the stuff will start making sense over the next couple of days. Again, callbacks are, as I'd said at the beginning, callbacks are not a thing. And when I say this, what I meant is, for loops are a thing. They're a thing that JavaScript has, a for loop. Functions are a thing. Right? I can make a new function. If statements are a thing. Callbacks are a pattern. They're a way that you do something. So I realized that what I wanted to do was have one function that could be used in different ways. Right? For example, I wanted to send Steven to do different things on different days. Or in this case here, I wanted to loop through an array, but do different things. And by using the idea that functions are a thing, functions are values, functions are like a thing that exists in JavaScript that have this property that I can move them around. I can use the pattern of callbacks to achieve that solution. Right? Does the fact that I say that callbacks are not a thing, does that make sense to people? Right? If it doesn't, I think it's something that like you'll develop over time. But I want you to keep in mind that callbacks are used in all sorts of places. You can be using callbacks today for things like sorting a list, right? Sorting an array. For some reason, that's going to take a callback. Right? Or you're going to be using callbacks for things like, similar to what we've done, looping through arrays and doing particular actions. But you're also going to use callbacks to solve particular web development issues that you're going to learn about next week. And even though callbacks there are going to seem different, right? They're going to seem like they're in a different context. I want you to think about the fact that the reason we use callbacks is to ask somebody to do an action later. Here's this action that I want you to do later. That makes sense? Okay. Now, like I said, today's lecture was pretty big. Right, this was a pretty big one. There's a lot of stuff that we went through. And I'm going to try and get the notes out as soon as possible. Right? If I can't get the notes out before, like right at noon, I apologize, but I'm going to try and get this code to you unformatted ahead of time. Right? So everything I've written right now, I'm just going to hop into Slack and just give you a link to it. But it's not going to have pretty notes. Just wait until like noon for pretty notes. I also suggest looking back at other instructors' notes, because there's some pretty great ones in the past couple months. And just dig through until you find something that vibes with you in feeling. Okay. Are there questions? Or concerns? You feeling hyped to play around with this stuff? Right? It's really cool. It's really cool the amount of richness in your expression that callbacks give you and that functions give you. Did you find this useful? Cool. Feel free again to reach out to me, message me on Slack if you want any extra explanation on stuff. especially if there's concepts from today or yesterday that you still feel haven't sunk in. What we can always do is just sit down together and work through stuff and strengthen those fundamentals together. And if it tends to be that like a couple people are having issues with the same thing, then I can always just tell the next lecturer to spend a good chunk of the first like part of the lecture to review those concepts, right? Because that's beneficial for you. Cool. But that can only happen if you like tell me if you're struggling with something. Sweet. For sure. This one here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can actually just take this and give it to you in Slack right now. Yeah. Sweet, sweet, sweet. So we are, what week is this? I mean, what month? It was May 27th. Yeah, 27 May. Yeah. Sweet. So here is code or text snippet and pachoo, pachoo. So you have that code. I'll send you the rest of it in a minute too. And then around noon, I'll send you like nicely formatted notes. Great. Have an awesome rest of your day. It's Thursday. What? It's going to be Friday tomorrow. That's awesome.